based inside the University of the Philippines campus here in Manila. Allow me to give a brief perspective on the professional consulting sector, as mentioned by Chris, and I'd be able to share a little bit about some of the challenges that we face. Slide. Let's go ahead. We've been taught as civil engineers that our designs must satisfy three important criteria. One, that designs need to be safe. Second, they should be able to be serviceable, meaning they function according to the intent and according to the needs of the users. And three, that the designs be economical. Okay, slides, please. Just give us the full slides. The economy tends to be the economic side of designs tends to be the most difficult one to overcome, because there's the limitation always in funding and resources that you have to make. So safety, serviceability, and economy, they tend to lead to three key performance indicators for us in our sector. One, that the scope be correct and be completely defined. Second, that there's projects are always should be done within an approved schedule. And third, that they must conform to an approved budget. So the totality of time, cost, and scope, they generally, in our context, define the so-called quality of the project. Next slide. We're saying now perhaps that we can consider that the key performance indicator in the design of infra projects also now include conform as a sustainable infra design guidelines. We want to be able to measure project success in terms of our capacity to define for survival and resiliency, understanding that there are needs of our sector that needs to be recognized and addressed. So we're asking for the possibility that sustainability be a key criteria in defining what a quality project might look like. By redefining what quality means within the civil engineering context, I hope that we in TC-31 can encourage a more purposive approach to the inclusion of sustainability in our infrastructure projects. Now, that being said, allow me to share 4 challenges that we see in our professional sector as we try to adopt more of the approaches in the planning design for projects. These are the challenge of the standard, the challenge of process ownership, the challenge of first cost, and the challenge of technology adaptation. In the Philippines, next slide, our DPWH and the PICE and the associations and the specialist committees have been doing what they can to address the difficulty of developing, updating our local standards. Practical concerns like budgets, for example, have made this difficult. And you'll notice that many of our standards tended to be updated, few and far between. It's, as a matter of fact, it's been difficult to get a copy for yourself. Most provisions focus on enhancing safety in the design criteria and construction requirements, and understandably so. If there will be a hierarchy, I think, of these standards, you probably look at safety coming first, serviceability next, and economy last. We address safety by risk management, and rightly so. And if you look at the civil engineering codes there on the left side, they're primarily focusing on those 2 aspects. We actually have we also have the environmental laws that are able to help provide facets of sustainable design. But what we've observed is that they kind of lack the integration needed so that we professionals can be guided accordingly. The Philippine Green Building Council, which was put up as the Philippine Green Building Code, which was put up and launched by DPWH in 2015, next slide, which is funded by the World Bank through the IFC, gives us a referral code against the National Building Code. But if you look at the details of the Philippine Green Building Code, its focus primarily is still on buildings. Outside of the Green Building Code, what we have essentially are more of frameworks rather than standards. And they tend to be more optional rather than prescriptive. And that will include PERDE, backslide, prior slide please, which is supported by prior slide. PERDE, which is supported or pushed by the architects no, in the Philippines. EDGE, which is supported by the IFC and the World Bank. And of course, the Philippine Green Building Code, which is put together by DPWH. Next slide. So out of curiosity, we surveyed 122 people to have a feel of their level of awareness of sustainable infra. About a third of the people that we surveyed are about 2 years in practice, 20% between 2 and 5 years, another 1/3 between 5 and 10, and about 13 were more of the old dogs with 10 years or more in experience. Close to 90% were engineers, about 6% were architects, and a few were tradesmen, guys that do drafting work and help in the design effort. We asked 3 simple questions. 1, are you aware of how sustainable infra is defined? 2nd, are you aware of standards in sustainable infrastructure design? And 3rd, should we have local standards? Now, what we found out in that quick survey, next slide, was that a mere 4% were very aware of the definition. 20% were aware of the definition. About 11 just heard of the term, just some familiarity, and about close to 70% were somewhat aware that there's such a thing. On the standard side, only 4% were aware of the presence of the standards. Almost nobody had an idea that we had the limited people had an idea that the Philippine Green Building Code was actually in effect. Even few were aware of the ASCE standard that we just recently released. And a few have said that they encountered 1 or 2 here and there, and about 22% had no idea. Regardless of the experience profile, however, we saw that 85% actually believe that it's very important that local civil engineering practice have standards that can be defined for sustainable infra. Next slide. The second challenge we have is it's a challenge of process ownership. We know that most projects in infrastructure go through several stages: feasibility and design and tender, construction, operation and maintenance, and eventually decommissioning. Each stage offers an opportunity to introduce some kind of sustainability measure, although the process becomes more difficult as the phases progress. The more we've built, the more difficult intervention gets. And it's easy to appreciate that sustainable infra becomes more viable when across the process, from the time it is planned to the time it is decommissioned, there's a shared interest from among the stakeholders. What we've seen, however, from practice is that as the drivers of each phase changes, the challenge to keep sustainability a priority becomes a challenge as well. People who will be within each process will have their particular context, will have their particular interest. They will be pushing their own agenda, and that sometimes might be in conflict with what we're trying to do on the sustainability front. Design and construction might be committed to sustainability, but when the operation maintenance work are disconnected from that process, the gains that we have from the very nice drawings and even the nice build can get disconnected. Private land, for example, where designs might be well planned. When the project is the community, they might they might actually tell us we weren't even part of the planning designs. Why are you asking us to do so many things? Owners would look to sustainability only because some of them might look to it only because it's a buzzword. It's very attractive for marketing. And they might be willing to take it on, provided that their budget is not impacted. Next slide. Simply put, the disconnect between the process and the phases can severely impact the planned positive things on sustainable design. Next slide. And the challenge for us, the design professionals, is to balance the designs which are attractive to manage across the project life cycle. And at the same time, hopefully they can be resilient to the changes in process ownership. Next slide. You see here in the slide in front of you that while the laws would be the overarching guidance for the design and construction, even in that area, we have some way to go. The consultants might introduce sustainability initiatives as interventions to support the master plan, and the contractor might work with good materials and methods, but during operation maintenance, those can be negated if there's a different agenda by the process owner. Next slide. The next one is the challenge of the first cost. And we have begun to understand that the economics of sustainability requires that planners and owners be able to look beyond the capital expenditure or the first cost and look to the full cost of ownership of the project. Since sustainable infra really requires having a life cycle perspective, this means that we, all the stakeholders, must be able to create a greater awareness of the cost and benefit to both users and the environment in the long term. We have to find some way to monetize the gains so that we are able to push the agenda forward. It's pretty common knowledge now that many of the sustainability initiatives require some kind of addition to the capital expense. But when we look at the long-term viability of the project, those can be recovered and gains both to the owner and the environment could be found. So we need both an understanding of CapEx and the understanding of the operation, maintenance, and with the decommissioning to be able to push the agenda. Next slide. In the private sector, we can understand that owners would want the soonest recovery of their investment. And many would not be willing to play the long game of recovering that investment throughout the entire life of the project. We understand that for the most part, budgets are often very constrained, and therefore, for us who are designing, that limits us to an extent to introduce measures because of the impact on CapEx. In government projects, in the public sector, agencies like our own Department of Public Works and Highways are often constrained with budget limitations. You cannot go a peso above the approved budget. And when the budget does not include the interventions, they cannot be introduced anymore. Often, projects have to be awarded to the lowest bidder and are not able to look beyond the CapEx. The planning and design efforts are often really constrained, and therefore there's less flexibility to introduce the measures. Us local consultants, unfortunately, do not have as much experience or competence in sustainability economics. This is an area that I think is a current challenge, but could also be an opportunity for our sector. Next slide. The next challenge is the challenge of technology adaptation. we've seen over the past 2, 3 decades the move, the opportunities that have been accorded our own sector to advance with the way we plan and design things. Advances in numerical modeling work, 3D-based software involving structures, soils, surface, water, have allowed design professionals to improve the process of designing infrastructure. However, we also find that our own industry is still yet to fully embrace advanced technologies to help in the development of sustainable infra. We are still, in many areas, not fully embraced GIS, the 3D data capture platform, building information modeling, artificial intelligence, and all of the other things that equip us to do a better forecast of how our infrastructure could actually perform. Next slide. The high cost of investing in the technologies is a typical roadblock that holds back what are otherwise a talent-laden pool of Philippine engineers. Tech-driven data collection is difficult to sell to clients who are often not willing to pay. And most clients do not see the value of these added workflows and approaches to the work. We want to adapt. We want to improve the adaptation of the technology, but its cost and acceptance in the local context has generally made it difficult for us in the professional services sector. Some closing thoughts. Next slide. We want to be able to continue to push for the development of frameworks and standards that rewards, if not requires, designers and contractors to embrace sustainability approaches. We want to be able to advocate for greater shared interests so that we could find a way for people to embrace the entire project life cycle and that costs and benefits could be better spread. Third, we want to incentivize projects that implement sustainability measures throughout the cycle. And fourth, we want to push for greater deployment of technology in design and construction. We've gone a long way from 25 years, almost 30 years ago when I was a young engineer, when we worked with DOS to do CAD work. We didn't memorize the code. We couldn't draw anything. Now we're able to run models in a 3D environment. We can run simulations. We can make predictive models that help us to understand how the environment could behave. But there's still quite some way to go for our sector in the local context. And we hope that as we embrace the requirements and the needs of sustainability, we hope that our sector is also able to cope. Thank you, everyone. I'll move you on now to Anthony Kane. I think will be joining us online. I'll be talking about the sustainability framework Envision. And let's welcome him and have him begin his presentation.
Hello, thank you, John. Hopefully everyone there can hear me. I don't know if someone's able to give a confirmation and see the slides. Well, again, thank you.
Yes, sir. We can see you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry to make you run up to the podium. But it's a pleasure to join you. Thank you for having me virtually. Sorry, I cannot be there in person. But I'm here to talk about sustainability and resiliency standards, specifically the Envision framework, but really I'll just be talking at a high level about the value and the reasons behind having standards and frameworks around sustainability. But very quickly, just a brief history of the Institute itself. ISI was created in 2010 through a collaboration of the American Society of Civil Engineers, the American Council of Engineering Companies, and the American Public Works Association, three leading organizations. And really, they had seen the transformative effect that building rating systems like LEED and BREEAM had on the building and architecture side, but recognized that there was an absence of similar sustainability frameworks for engineering and infrastructure. And they recognize the value of having a single standardized framework for the entire industry rather than each of them coming up with their own guidelines or their own frameworks. So they banded together to create ISI as a central place for them to collaborate. And that was the genesis of creating Envision, the Sustainability and Resiliency Framework for Infrastructure. So ISI is a nonprofit organization, and we're really a hub for the industry. So our membership includes private sector AEC firms, government entities, and universities. So you can imagine how our purpose is to identify where in tackling sustainability there are shared resources or collaboration where all of that can lead to greater efficiency and for us to play our part in doing that. Envision is the primary activity that we do, but it has grown internationally. So we partner with local engineering organizations and sustainability organizations to disseminate Envision. So, I mean, I don't want to read the slide, but Canada, Italy, China, Colombia, Mexico, Spain, we work with many organizations around the world. But before I get into, again, the reasons for adopting standards and frameworks around sustainability, I want to talk briefly about the conceptual models that often underpin these standards and how it's important to analyze those when you're choosing one. This is a very common model that you may be familiar with when we look at the three pillars of sustainability, which is the social, environmental, and economic impacts. It's a Venn diagram. But what this is, intended is to convey the idea that you need all three of these together. The side effects of this conceptual model is that it's often viewed as if these are opposing forces and that we must sacrifice two or three or, two to get one area. And it sort of presents sustainability as if it's a zero-sum game, that these are, again, opposing forces and that you have to compromise in order to achieve sustainability. That's why we've seen a shift more recently to what's called the tiered model, which here we're looking at the dependencies of these systems on one another, the dependency of the economy on our social well-being, the dependency of both of those on a healthy environment. And so, again, these are just different ways of thinking about the fundamentals of sustainability, but they become important when they're manifest in standards and frameworks. Another model that I'll quickly go through is this idea of mapping out human development or quality of life against environmental and ecological impact, right? So our goal in sustainability is to increase our human development while decreasing our resource consumption and environmental impact. That has been mapped out by other organizations. And as you can imagine, countries across the world fall in different places. So some countries have a very high human development index, but are also high consumers of resources. Those that are low consumers of resources often fall lower in the quality of life axis. This is important in the Asian context because, as Chris mentioned, you have a great diversity of where countries fall on this chart. So while the driver behind sustainability for some countries may be a reduction in resources and environmental impacts while maintaining an already high human development, other countries may still be prioritizing human development and quality of life first while not increasing their resource consumption. So you may have countries that have fundamentally different priorities as you're looking at sustainability standards and frameworks. Now, this I don't have to go through. I know everyone in the audience is very familiar with the many challenges that we are facing. The important part is that with all of these critical issues, infrastructure plays a central role. It is an economic driver. It is the underpinning of human health, environmental protection, and there is a key element of equity and social justice that goes throughout all of it. And the value of standards and frameworks is, you just heard from John, we're already dealing with a very complex system. Infrastructure is very complex. Infrastructure delivery is very complex. Now we're adding on to it half a dozen also complex issues, and we're saying that infrastructure has to solve all of them simultaneously. Without a standard or a framework, a way of streamlining and simplifying this, it becomes exponentially more difficult to deliver on those goals, right? So the value of standards and frameworks is you sacrifice, say, flexibility, right, or uniqueness in exchange for consensus conformity and efficiency. And that's the trade-off. The good news is that we, on the infrastructure side, have a model that has gone before us. So again, as was mentioned in John's slides, there are many building codes, building standards, building
Sir,
sustainability frameworks.
excuse me.
Yes.
We just have a
Yes.
technical problem.
Oh, no.
We lost your audio.
Oh,
Give us a few minutes to fix the audio.
okay.
Okay, sir, can we start again?
Yes. Do I need to go back, or were you still able to
Maybe
hear my audio?
one slide, sir.
Okay. No problem. So did everyone hear this slide on the different priorities that we may experience within countries? Well, I'll continue. So on this slide, I had talked about that there are many different challenges, complex challenges that we're facing, and the value of standards and frameworks in simplifying these, considering the already overly complex nature that is both designing and delivering infrastructure projects. The good news for our industry is that there is a model that has gone before us that we can look to. So as John was mentioning, there are many building standards and codes that have been around for quite some time now. There is the LEED framework and BREEAM framework. In many ways, Envision was designed, again, as a comparable tool to LEED and BREEAM, but specifically designed for infrastructure. And those, beginning in the early 2000s, as they were adopted, we saw key trends. And so in my personal opinion, often with frameworks or rating systems, the key value is not only just in the assessment itself, but in the transformative effects that they have on the broader industry. So when we saw the adoption of sustainable building requirements, that led to a third-party accountability and reporting, so more trust and confidence in sustainability, a reduction in greenwashing. It helped in learning and escalating our performance goals, right? So once you have a framework for doing something, you can then do better the next time. But if each project is a unique approach to sustainability, it's comparing apples to oranges, and there's no really good way to demonstrate your growth and progress. It also led to cascading requirements at government levels, right? So the government is not going to step in and require something if it's not clear what that is. But the existence of standards and frameworks allow government entities to point to something and say, you will do that, or we will adopt something similar. So you see it then working its way into governance, the market transformation at all levels. So one example I point out is that before building systems like LEED, it was very difficult to get product information from manufacturers. But as those systems began requiring that, it led to downstream improvements in information sharing, data collection. We're seeing the same now as we tackle embodied carbon, right? Everyone from manufacturers all the way up to designers are looking at how do we measure and collect data on embodied carbon. And it transforms the education and practice. So again, before these systems, maybe there were environmental courses or things that you could take on the architecture profession. Now, sustainable practice is part of a core curriculum. It's part of a required accreditation. And we're seeing the same on the engineering side. And really, all of those together allow for this rapid scaling of sustainability efforts. So you need every aspect of the industry working together in sync to make this happen. And standards and frameworks are what allow that to occur. So some of the reasons that we see at the more local level for why would you adopt standards? Again, the accountability for government is very important. Many of you experience what we call the NIMBYism, right? The resistance to infrastructure, the perception that infrastructure development is negative, unhealthy, unsafe for individuals, when in fact, the purpose of infrastructure is often public health and safety, improvement of our community. So we have a public perception issue, and accountability can be one way of tackling that. It's important, as I already mentioned, understanding those complex trade-offs. So while we're trying to adjust equity and economic recovery and biodiversity, we're not going to be able to be successful on every project in all of those. So how do we justify the trade-offs that some projects are going to do better in areas than others? And then how do we prioritize those projects? How do we ensure that the limited funding and the limited approval that we know exists for these projects, that we're prioritizing the ones that are going to have the best social and environmental impacts? And then, of course, the nature of these standards, which is to set higher targets for ourselves, targets that go beyond our minimum code compliance and requirements that show that we can deliver value. And the value of standardized approaches. I think COVID-19 was a great example of when you are dealing with a global issue, a global challenge, these standardized national and international approaches are the only way to really mobilize action at a large scale. And finally, again, all of these together are what initiate that systemic change that we know has to happen. It's not going to be just standards and codes. It's standards and frameworks and education and policy and governance and funding all together. And frameworks can be how you rally around that. And finally, as I wrap up, some global trends that we're seeing that might also drive this. So increasingly, the United Nations, NGOs, all are emphasizing sustainability, focusing on, as Chris said, this decade of action. We're seeing multilateral development banks also revising their lending frameworks to not only include financial risks or social risks, but also a kind of full sustainability risk assessment. Private investors that are now increasingly looking to expand investment into infrastructure are also looking at the sort of corporate image risks and things and looking at ESG screening for projects. We're seeing greater global awareness, right? So as communities become more connected, the access to information is easier. Communities can see what other communities around the world are getting in terms of infrastructure. They can find out things about companies and projects and what they're doing or not doing. And so the bar of accountability from public perception is getting higher. And so sustainability, again, is a great way to address that. And we're seeing, as I mentioned, an increase in environmental product declarations, essentially more information from manufacturers. Our access to data, our access to information is increasing, which is allowing us to do more sophisticated assessments. And then finally, it is working its way into academia, licensure, increasingly professional associations indicating that sustainability is really an ethical responsibility of all professionals. So again, standards and frameworks are helping with all of this. As far as strategies for how we might adopt these and what we can do to improve our performance, start with incremental improvements. We have a big goal, but start somewhere, start small. These standardized tools can be incredibly helpful. Be sure to document. Again, demonstrating the value, demonstrating success allows us to move on to the next one. I think Chris Lebon has wonderful stories about basically how documenting his success has allowed him to grow the sustainability program significantly. Monitor performance is a part of that. And then, of course, sharing our lessons learned with the rest of the world. Again, part of that great ability of me to be able to talk to you from half a world away. We're learning from all of these countries, projects all around the world now, and we should be open to those ideas. And then, of course, the common phrase, think global, act local. These sustainability tools and frameworks, be mindful of how they may be customized to your local context. That chart that I showed you in the beginning of what are the priorities of your community and your country, and are these frameworks suitable for that? And finally, just one trend that we're seeing as well is breaking out of our traditional silos of one problem, one solution, and moving to what we call multi-benefit projects, which I think is what sustainability is really getting at, that we're layering as much value onto every project as we can. Just briefly, this was a derelict site in Atlanta, Georgia. As you can see, it's just sort of a dumping ground, but it was an issue of flood protection and flood control. So this was a stormwater management project, essentially. It could have been a very traditional, stormwater management gray infrastructure solution. This was the final development. Just quickly, if I jump back, you can see the buildings in the background are the same. And so we're layering community value onto traditional infrastructure systems. So yes, we have to address flooding or a technical issue within the community, but have we engaged the community to understand their values, their needs, and embedded those improvements into the projects themselves? There's so many projects that I come across where it's very large budget projects that are solving a technical solution, but they talk to the community and the community wants a park, or they want some green space, and it's 1% of or less of the project's budget sometimes. But then when you talk to the community as to how their opinion of the project changed, it's that 1% really that made the difference for them, and got their buy-in and made this something really valuable. So be thinking about multi-benefit projects and what you can do. And then just finally, I really encourage you to start early, as early as possible. We often deal with the perception, and John mentioned this about initial cost and how sustainability costs more. I feel very strongly that often our perceptions of cost and even that initial capital cost is because we're really designing conventional projects and deciding at the end whether we're going to add a few sustainability features or not, right? And yes, that's going to add costs. What we're talking about is a fundamental change in how we conceptualize projects, and that we incorporate these social and environmental conditions at the beginning. And when we do that, we should not see an additional cost. It should just be how we are doing things. And as John mentioned, of course, then you'll see also life cycle value significantly higher. But often what we're doing in this chart is waiting till the very end when it's the most expensive, and then adding a few sustainability features because we're unsure, right? So we want to make sure we still have our conventional project in case we don't want to add the sustainability features. So again, be thinking about sustainability as early as possible. And that finally is is where these standards and frameworks can really help as well, right? Because they give you something to start with at that earliest phase, something solid that you can begin working around. So with that, I just want to say thank you again, and I look forward to the question and answer section. Thank you.
Above. Thank you. So, good afternoon. I'm Elaine Morales.